Violence Against Women with Disabilities with Stephanie Ortoleva, Esquire, of Women Enabled. Excerpted from a panel discussion on gender stereotypes in New York City, March 8, 2013, in conjunction with the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Sponsored by Help Age International, Now Foundation, Women Enabled, World YWCA, and Women's United Nations Report Network. Before Ms. Ortoleva spoke, we were welcomed by the moderator, Ms. Gombonzvanda, who noted that it was International Women's Day.
Women's rights, gender equality, non-discrimination, intergenerational leadership, in our diversity,
Then Ms. Ortoleva spoke to the topic of women and girls with disabilities.
Indeed, women with disabilities are our forgotten sisters. In fact, there are 1 billion persons with disabilities, according to the World, never can say that, WHO and World Bank Organization 2011 report. So that's 15% of the global population. But if you break that down by gender, men are approximately 12% of the world's population, while women with disabilities are 19%. And in fact, we have a good opportunity. In April, the Committee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is going to do a general discussion on women with disabilities. And this is a great opportunity for us, as they develop their general recommendation on women, to encourage, prod, push them to, in fact, include this gender lens of stereotyping as they're discussing the issue. So as I said, both the gender and disability stereotyping concepts are, in fact, compounded. They really make it a double difficult situation, and we have to look at them separately, but look at them together as well and how they interact. In fact, the CRPD, which is our shorthand word for the Disability Convention, has a complete article on gender stereotyping, much like the CEDAW does. And indeed, there are a variety of not only stereotypes, but also cultural and traditional harmful practices that intersect with those notions of gender and disability stereotyping with respect to women and girls with disabilities. And in fact, for women with disabilities, there is in fact, the violence that women with disabilities experience has interesting complexities. So there are great varieties, the causes, consequences for women with disabilities, as well as the manifestations are more complex and more compounded. While women with disabilities experience many of the same forms of violence that women in general experience, women with disabilities also experience unique forms and consequences of violence. Indeed, we have to recollect and understand as we go through this discussion of gender stereotyping that women with disabilities are in fact women too and need to be considered within our discussions, both integrated into those discussions. So a variety of manifestations, which I'll go through very, very quickly, that relate to the gender stereotyping issue. But as you hear some of these, think about the differences and the potential differences of how these manifestations may be experienced differently by women with disabilities than by women in general. Indeed, all women seek autonomy and full legal capacity, but in addition to the generalized lack of autonomy and legal capacity of women, women with disabilities are very explicitly, as persons with disabilities, denied legal capacity, denied power to make decisions about our own lives. In some places, women with disabilities are not allowed to marry. It's prohibited for a woman with a disability to marry. Enter contracts like all women, but this has even more implications for women with disability. And in fact, of course, as with all women, there's an impunity that's experienced with respect to violence. And like all women, the violence is rarely reported, but the violence has a very unique consequences. Like other women who fear leaving an abusing situation. Very often women with disabilities depend on that family member or partner, or indeed medical personnel, for their basic ability to live, to move, to leave home. So if you use a wheelchair and your abusive partner takes your wheelchair away, you can't even leave your home, physically, let alone psychologically and emotionally. And other stereotypes that are very common throughout history and regrettably that pervade through this day is that women with disabilities are viewed as a manifestation of curse. Women who have a child with a disability are seen as being punished, in fact, for some wrongdoing that they had done in the past. Your disabled child is a punishment for your, quote, sin, unquote. Women with disabilities are denied many of the important civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. And these are indeed in some ways different, as I mentioned before, with women with disabilities, for example, are not allowed to, in many states, purely because they are a person with a disability, are allowed to vote, or the electoral system is indeed completely inaccessible to them. So just briefly in conclusion, because I probably overextended my time, we really notice that the gender stereotyping combined with the disability stereotyping does indeed reinforce both patriarchal and notions of power and control. Indeed, these attitudes and gender stereotypes deprive women and girls with disabilities of our most basic human rights. As Hillary Clinton said, women's rights are human rights. Well, that also applies. The rights of women with disabilities are also human rights. Doesn't have quite the same ring. So I encourage, as we all think about stereotyping, when we go to the rest of the panels during the session and stereotyping is discussed, please think about stereotyping and think about violence with respect to women and girls with disabilities. And we encourage vigorously that women's organizations, I'm sure many of you were drawn to this panel as women's rights activists, but when you continue forward with your work, include those organizations of women and girls with disabilities who are very committed generally to women's rights, but also to disability rights, so that if we work together and collaboratively with mutual respect and support each other's work, we can in fact advance the rights of all women. And as I usually end my talks with the refrain of, women with disabilities are women too. Thank you.
This video was taped and edited by Bonnie Peace Watkins. For more information, go to womenenabled.org or the sponsoring group Women's UN Report Network, onerun.org.